Hello. Hello. I'm Jeff McGoy, Director of Exploratory Student Advisement and a 2-degree alum of the Department of Communication Studies at SIUC. Welcome to BrandU 2020, hosted by Southern Illinois University Carbondale's Department of Communication Studies. This session is sponsored by the generous donations of our alumni and sponsors, Communication at Work LLC and the SIUC College of Liberal Arts. Now, for those attending for class credit, please note that a link to a survey will be dropped into the chat during the stream for you to complete. Even if your instructor provided assistance or instructions, we recommend that you complete this survey so that you can receive credit. The form will only be available temporarily. Now, on behalf of faculty, staff, students, alumni, friends, and today's speaker, I would like to welcome you to the session, How Design Makes Your World with Scott Berkun. Scott is a best-selling author of 8 books, including The Myths of Innovation, Confessions of a Public Speaker, and The Year Without Pants. His work has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Forbes, the Wall Street Journal, The Economist, The Guardian, Wired Magazine, USA Today, Fast Company, National Park Radio, CNN, NPR, MSNBC, and other media. His popular blog is at scottberkun.com, and he tweets at Berkun. You can read all about his latest book, How Design Makes the World, at designmtw.com. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Scott Berkun to SIUC.
Thank you, Jeff, for that fantastic introduction. So good morning, everybody. I'm going to wave to you now from Seattle, Washington, which is about maybe 1,500 miles to the west of you. So for me, east is that way. So I'm going to wave to you right now. You should wave back if you're feeling silly like I am. It is a Friday morning during a pandemic. Tomorrow's Halloween. I know you get some course credit for this. So if I can't have you have some fun for the next hour, then I'm doing something very wrong. So the title of this session is How Design Makes Your World. Now, if you know the way the universe works, I currently don't know who you are. So I can't really presume to know everything about how your world works and what design has to do with it. But I wrote this book called How Design Makes the World. And my job for this hour is to talk about what design means, how it affects your life. And the best way to do that is to start by telling you some stories about my life. I know you're all students now. Many of you who are listening are students. I have very vivid memories of being a student and how I dealt with the challenges of my life as I was approaching graduation. So that's a story I want to share with you. I'm going to flip over now to my laser light show fancy presentation. And here we go. So my first story for you, I have about 30 minutes of stories to share with you, and I'm going to open things up for Q&A, and I'm happy to answer questions about anything you want to know. It could be stuff I'm going to share with you about these stories. It could be something to do with public speaking, since that's a big part of how I make a living. It could be about writing books. So as you're listening, listen with that ear what you want to hear me talk about once my storytelling is done. So my first story I want to share with you has to do with being lost in Pittsburgh. So I graduated in 1994 from Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's about 500 miles from where most of you probably are. But I didn't start college there. I actually started college at a different university called Drew University. I grew up in Queens, New York City. New Jersey borders New York. And I chose this college for some very shallow reasons. One of the primary reasons was I was dating a girl and she was going to go to a college nearby. So I thought, what a great idea. I should choose my university based on a relationship that wouldn't last very long. This photo taken here was on the first day of school, well before she broke up with me a few weeks later. So that was a mistake. The other reason why I chose Drew University is my fantasy, my dream in life was to play in the NBA. Drew University is a Division III college. I was able to just squeak by and make that team. But as you might have guessed, I did not make it to the NBA. So that was another bad decision. I had a fantastic year. My first year at Drew University. I was excited. Basketball was fun. I had a great time, but my grades were terrible. I basically failed out of my first year. And it was a frustrating and devastating experience for me. I had to move back home to my parents, which was just embarrassing and devastating to me personally. And I just struggle and fight to find my way out. I went to City College in New York. It's called CUNY, City University of New York, got my grades up. And I managed to transfer into another college called Carnegie Mellon University. Now, if you look at this photo here, I had become a much harder, much more serious person, and that was reflected by Carnegie Mellon. It was a very serious school, very competitive, and known for being a school about computer science and technology. And so I worked really hard there, as hard as I could, and I graduated. Well, before I graduated, though, my senior year at Carnegie Mellon, I live in this floor of this wonderful house a few blocks away from campus. It looks like a wonderful house, looks like it's a great design, but this was in this area near campus, which many of you probably know. All the homes are converted to be pack in as many college students as possible. So this one floor, we had 4 or 5 bedrooms. Every room on that floor was converted into a bedroom to fit as many people in as possible. And I had a great year that senior year. And early on that year, I started trying to find jobs and interviewing and using the Career Center to help me find jobs. And I had all these interviews, and I was so excited. I thought, yes, my life's going to begin now. The choice to go to college and do all these things was great. But little by little, I was not getting anywhere. I did not get any job offers. And by the end of the first semester, many of my friends already had jobs, and they were planning to move away to San Francisco and Boston, all these places. And I kept fighting, though. I kept working as hard as I could. But then spring went through, April, May, and graduation came around. My parents drove out from Queens to come to my graduation day, and I was excited and proud. But at the end of that day, my parents drove home, and all my roommates had moved out. They either had jobs or they were juniors and underclassmen, and they went home for the summer. All my friends were gone. My girlfriend, I had a new girlfriend who's now my wife, so that's a better story on that dimension, but she was away. She had an internship in Australia. So I was completely alone. And I remember that day vividly, that every decision I had made up until that moment, going to kindergarten, going to elementary school, junior high, high school, college, there was a sequence of steps that was very natural. My family, my parents, my community, our culture provides those series of steps. And I had recognized now on that day that I had reached the end of those series of steps. I had done all the things, and I was supposed to graduate on to getting a job, but that didn't happen. So I had this very new experience for me, this existential experience of I'm at the end of the road. There's no longer a clear next step for me. And I did not know how to process that. It was the first time in my life that I wasn't struggling exactly. It was just this recognition that there was no longer a next step for me. And I had to figure out what to do now in a way I'd never had to do before. Now, I'd studied philosophy a bit in college. I knew all these pithy quotes and little anecdotes that would impress people, make me sound wise. But I was sort of like the character from Good Will Hunting. I knew the ideas, but I'd never experienced this before. So the quote that came to mind back then was this quote, that we live life forwards, but understand it backwards. And that quote suddenly had resonance for me, that in that moment, I recognized that I had been progressing and going up to this point, but I reached the limit of all the things I could possibly process or understand. And on that day, I started looking at everything that had happened before then in a very different way. I'd been taking for granted this progression that I had been fortunate enough and privileged enough to follow along all the way through. Even through all my struggles, even through all the hard work that I did, I was now at the end of the road. And what Kierkegaard was on here about was something very powerful that I started to realize, which is our brains are wired to be in the moment. From survival evolution, we have all of our attention focused on the current moment. Right now, I'm focused on the current moment of trying to share the story with you. Hopefully, you on the other end are focused on trying to listen to the story and find out where it's going to go, and that you're not asleep. So we focus on the present, but we can't do that much about the present. We do our best, but it's only when things happen and time passes, a day later, a week later, a month later, and it's in your past, then you have the ability to review what happened and ask questions about it and apply different lenses to it. That's where we learn a lot about who we are, what things mean, how we can learn from them. And that's a powerful thing. But on that day, I just recognized that there was something that needed to change, and I didn't really know what to do. Now, this is a great moment to switch to talking about design. So far, I'm telling you this life story, which hopefully you find interesting. My goal is to talk about design. Now, this word design gets used superficially all the time. We think of design as the layer on top of things. Designer sneakers or designer clothes, that's about style. It's this layer that you put on top of something. But I want to offer you a very different use of that word. And that's the use of the word as a verb. That design is a verb. It's something you do. It's something a set of approaches you take to solving a problem that allow you to sort through different ideas and apply them, prototype them, and develop them to reach hopefully a better a better solution in the end. It's an activity, it's a process, it's an action. We tend to think of designs as things because most of the world around us was designed by other people. But part of my ambition is for more people, including you, to think and use design as a tool for evaluating and thinking about your own life. Now, related to my story and Kierkegaard's quote, a lot of the time we're so focused on just getting through the day. We're stressed out, we're overloaded, we have deadlines, we have budgets, we have frustrating people to deal with. It's a struggle to figure out I need to just get this done. But if you do that too much, which is really not designing at all, you're just scrambling. You do that too much, you end up in these situations where the conclusion, the result of what you've done is not satisfying. There's no clear goal. The other way to work is from the top down. This is where design comes more into play. That if you can spend time, maybe not all the time, but periodically exploring the outcome, let me think about the result first, and then figure out how do I make it so my daily choices line up with that? How do I make it so the things that I am working on a daily basis actually line up to something greater in the future? So if you went to a designer, as a specific example, if you went to a designer and said, hey, I want to make the best backpack ever. I want you to build me the best backpack ever, design it for me. Well, a designer would reject that as a framework or a goal because it's too vague. And in our lives, we often have very vague, abstract goals. I want to be famous. I want to be wealthy. In my case, I want to play in the NBA. That's a nice idea. You may be passionate about it, but it's so abstract that it can't really be dealt with. You can't really focus on that in any practical way. You have to divide that down into smaller pieces and units that you can actually use. So a designer, if you told them I want to make a perfect backpack, they wouldn't just pick one idea for a backpack and hand it to you. They do something like what you see here, which is a designer taking their creative skills and their ability to draw as a way to express those ideas, and they'd sketch out alternative ideas. They wouldn't buy any fabric. They wouldn't get any materials. They wouldn't start building anything because that's a potential big waste of effort and time. Instead, they would sketch things out. They would try to imagine the conclusion and do a low cost, usually low time, low effort set of alternatives. What if it had a strap here? What if it had a pocket here? And then they come back to you and they say, well, let me show you some of these examples. Which ones are closer to what you imagine and which ones are further away? They take that feedback, they'd incorporate it, and they'd review it, and they would go forward. And so you have this sequence, this process, again, design being a verb, of using the future, your ability to speculate about the future without spending too much time or effort, and to project that and explore that, and then use that to figure out what should I be doing on a daily basis. So as a writer, I get asked all the time, how do you write a book? What do you do? All these things, all these secrets people want to know. One thing that's the closest approximation of a secret is when I'm beginning a new book project, I think about the end. I think about the conclusion. I think about the result. One way to manifest that is the back cover of the book. Now, I may write a book. So this book, How Design Makes the World, has about 200 pages in it. But no one's going to read those 200 pages if they don't like what's on the back cover. That's one page. So before I spend 2 years writing a book and writing 200 pages, it makes a lot of sense to think like a designer. And let me think about and envision what that one back cover copy would read like. That shouldn't take me that long. It's just a page. But if I think really carefully and precisely about, well, what promise would I offer the reader? What kind of people who are important and are respected would I hope could give me a quote? And what exactly would they say? I can speculate that and do that maybe in an hour. And then I can show that to people and ask for feedback on this little thing that only took me an hour, rather than investing 2 years to create the whole thing. That's thinking more like a designer and using the ability to prototype, make a simple thing that illustrates the idea, and use that to gain feedback and understand the goal better than just committing yourself and dedicating yourself and ending up scrambling and not really maximizing your chances of having the success that you want. Now, this is not a unique idea. This is a strong idea in the design world, but there's other pockets of this kind of thinking you can find everywhere. So Amazon, which is, as I'm sure you know, they're here in Seattle. They're based here in Seattle. One business practice they have that's another manifestation of the same idea is before they launch a new project, the person who's proposing that project writes the press release. They write the communication material, the communication artifact that's going to go out to the world to explain the project. Before they create the budget, before they hire people for the project, they review that press release. They talk about that press release. Is this compelling enough? Does this make sense for our strategy enough? To us to decide to invest a year or 2 years or $100 million in this project? And they will discuss that artifact without ever doing this stuff before. That's really smart. That's really efficient. But you have to be willing to work with these speculations, these sketches, if you will, of what the future could possibly hold. Now, one other way to think about designing and using design in your own life is this idea of iterations, which is a fancy word for working in a loop. And the simplest example of this is what people know, what everyone knows about writing books, that you're writing an essay, that you're going to write a first draft. And you're writing that first draft with the full knowledge that once you finish the first draft, you're definitely not done. You are not done. You're writing the first draft, like Kierkegaard talked about. You're writing the first draft in the present, and you put it away for an hour or a day, and now it's in the past. So the Scott of yesterday wrote that book draft. So now the Scott of today, when I wake up, I get a gift from the Scott of yesterday that I can go and look at and examine from all different lenses. It's already been created for me. And that sets me up to write the second draft, review that, third draft, fourth draft. The process, by definition, for anyone who's serious about doing these kinds of creative projects, you know you are drafting and sketching and prototyping. And the goal of each version, each draft, isn't to be complete. It's to get you more information, a better idea, to set you up for making better choices for the next draft. That kind of thinking is integral to all creative work. Musicians do it, filmmakers do it, obviously authors do it, and designers of all the things that you use around you employ the same model of thinking. Some people hate this idea. They hate it. Why? It seems inefficient. You could say, well, if you were really a good author, shouldn't you just get it right on the first try? Shouldn't you just need one draft? And there are some romantic mythological stories about writers who only write one draft, which are mostly 99% of the stories are entirely untrue. They're legends and they're fun romanticizations of what creative work is like. But thinking in these loops and these processes is a lot of what good designers do. Now, these two different views of things, you're spending all this time scrambling. Let's see. Okay. You're spending all this time scrambling, and maybe you end up with success with this like surprise versus this other view where you can really have the time to explore and define things first. I don't think you ever get to completely go one or the other. You're going to end up spending some of your time working in one way because you have to, or working top down when you can. You're going to go back and forth. You're going to explore and come up with a draft, a rough idea, the back cover. Then you're going to dig in and actually do the work of writing the book. But then at some point, you're going to go back up. Let me explore again. Let me see what I've learned. And you go back and forth. And I mentioned the word iteration before. It's also called looping, where you're working in a loop where you know you're going to come back around. And this is a universal way to apply design thinking to a lot of the choices and things that we do in our lives. Now, to wrap up and finish up my personal story that I started with, what happened to me? Well, Pittsburgh, I was stuck there. Pittsburgh, as you may know, not the best place to be in the summer. After everyone's graduated, it's very hot, it's very humid, it's kind of horrific in a Halloween sense. But I needed to keep making money if I could. I had college loans that were going to be, I had to pay soon. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. I just looked to find contract little jobs that would help me pay the rent and keep going. One of the kinds of contract jobs that I got was actually writing chapters for books. I had enough technical knowledge from my computer science degree that I was able to work on little side projects. One of the side projects was in 1995, before the web took over, which is how old I am. Books like this, special edition, using the internet with your Mac. And I wrote chapters on how to use Telnet and how to use Unix commands and all these things that are obscure and completely forgotten by now. And the only reason my name appears on the book is because of the random fortune that my last name starts with a B. That's the only reason I'm credited on Amazon for that book. There's many other authors who wrote chapters that were just as important as mine, but I got lucky there. And then eventually, I got hired at Microsoft. It took until September that year, so I was unemployed basically for 4 months, just writing contract work. I got a job. I got an interview from Carnegie Mellon. It worked out, and I moved out here to Seattle. I would have taken any job I could have gotten, and I was super happy that I made it here to Microsoft because no one in my community ever got to go to a place like Carnegie Mellon, much less a place like Microsoft, the Fortune 500 company. And I had a long career here at Microsoft. I had a long career at Microsoft managing project teams and working it with design as a tool to make good projects and try to make software that was easier to use for people. However much we achieved, that's a different story, but that was always the goal. But I reached a point in figuring out what I wanted to do next, that I had been at Microsoft for about 10 years, and I had this different kind of what now experience. This question of, I've been doing the same thing now for 10 years, and if I want to do anything else with my life, I need to start thinking about doing that. I was 32 years old, and all I had done was work in the tech sector. And I had the fantasies of doing other things. I thought maybe I could make a movie. Maybe I should write a novel. Maybe I should, I don't know, try something else before I was so committed to staying in the tech sector. I thought the longer I stayed in one profession, the greater the likelihood that I would never leave it. So I read this book called What Should I Do With My Life by Paul Bronson. Unlike every other self-help book I've read about making life choices, I thought it was fantastic. Most books like that I've read are so linear. They tell you do A, do B, do C. If you do this, follow this formula, you'll figure it out. And I found that so unlike my experience with life. But this book was very different. And I recommend it to people all the time who are trying to figure out what they're going to do, because the book is just stories. Kind of like the story I've been telling you so far about mine, where I did a lot of the right things in college. I couldn't find a job. Was that my fault? Maybe, but sometimes you do the right things and the outcome isn't what you expected. Those are the kinds of stories in this book. Some people make the risky choice and it works out. Some people make the risky choice and it's a disaster. Some people stay in the safe thing and it's great. Some people stay in the safe thing and they're not that happy. Those kinds of dimensions were really useful to me to recognize the reality of it and hear other people's stories of making those choices. So if you are graduating soon or you're thinking about your future, this is the one book I would recommend that was the most honest telling of real stories of people making those kinds of choices. So obviously, since I'm talking to you, I quit. It took me a year to write a book. It did not get published. I couldn't find a publisher for it, but I managed to write another book that did get published. It did well. And that's why I'm here. I've written a series of books. Every book goes out into the world. I have to design that book and figure out who it's marketed for, to do public speaking about that book. And I've done this sequence now 8 times over the last 18 years. The kicker, I'm very proud. I've never believed that I would ever be able to be here for this long doing this kind of work. But what's happened now, it's another twist on the same story that I've been telling you so far. That right now I'm in a what now moment myself, to be completely honest with you. Half of what the living that most authors make is from speaking. And that's how I made this whole thing work. And the pandemic and everything that's happened this year has totally blown up the professional events industry. So it's not clear how I'm going to make a living for 2021. All this is uncertain and unknown. And I'm back now in a rehashing in a way of being lost in Pittsburgh. That same kind of life experience is something now I'm going through again in a different way. I have more choices and more flexibility for what I can do. But the lesson of the story, being lost in Pittsburgh, is really about how some of these patterns and shapes, you call them a design pattern for life, you never completely outgrow them. It sometimes feels like it's a spiral where you come back to these same sorts of experiences about what choice to make again and again in your life. And I expect that whatever happens for me next year, this won't be the last time that I have a what now kind of experience. It makes me think back to Pittsburgh and to Kierkegaard and all of those things. Now, my last 2 stories for you are actually about design. And I want to be specific about design, applying some of what I've talked to you now back into how things in our lives are actually made. So one story I want to share with you is about the fire that happened at the Notre Dame Cathedral last year. And this probably seems like it happened 20 years ago, but it's actually only about 14 months ago, the terrible fire at the Notre Dame Cathedral. Now, we don't know why the fire started still to this day. What I want to talk about is the design of the fire alarm system in that building. They spent millions of dollars engineering the fire alarm system for the Notre Dame Cathedral. It's a building that's centuries old. They were very careful about it. They had all these plans and documents to plan and engineer to do it right. But they had one thing they didn't think about. They didn't think much about who was going to use the fire alarm system. Now, it seems like a stupid thing to forget, but a fire alarm, well, the alarm goes off and someone should call the fire department. That should be obvious. But they didn't think about who was the actual user. And in this case, it was the security guards. The security guards who worked at Notre Dame Cathedral that day, one of them who was there was relatively new and was working a double shift. So he was inexperienced and tired. The message that the user interface for the fire alarm system showed him had two messages. One was this, ZDA 110-3-15-1, which probably means nothing to you. It probably meant nothing to the security guard. The other message that he got was this, attic Nave Sacristy. And a sacristy is basically a storeroom inside of the cathedral. But given that the security guard was not that well trained, was inexperienced, he really didn't know what that meant. So these great illustrations from the New York Times help explain what happened and what the design flaw was. The employee, the alarm went off, he saw those messages, he saw sacristy, he went to the image, the building you see out here that was outside the building, the sacristy that was outside. But the actual message said attic Nave Sacristy. There were two sacristies in the cathedral. He didn't know that. So he went to the wrong one. He called his boss, had some kind of ridiculous conversation. Hey, there's no fire here. Hey, where are you? I'm in the sacristy. Which sacristy? There's two sacristies, which is completely absurd and tragicomic if you think about what happened. Eventually, they figured out he's in the wrong sacristy. He goes upstairs. 300 steps to get all the way to the top. They get there. There's a huge inferno that we all know what happened then. So the fire alarm is about the short time between alarm goes off, someone takes the right action to accelerate the fire getting put out. That was extended now because of the design of it by probably 15 or 20 minutes. That's why it was a devastating disaster as opposed to a minor incident. So we can look at this and go, that's really stupid. The ZDA 110, who could that, we now, Kierkegaard again, we're looking backwards and we know the results. We look at this with different eyes. But for years, that was the way the system was designed. No one complained about it at all. There's other instances of similar things happening in design. Tragic things happen because things being under designed. There was a radiation machine, had this UI, had different modes in it. And if you had the wrong mode on, you could accidentally, the person using it could accidentally give someone a lethal dose of radiation. And that happened several times until they recognized it was a flaw in the design. It wasn't human error, really. The design was not thinking through who was going to use it. And more recently, this happened this year, the Robinhood app, which is a day trading app anyone can use, it's designed for consumers. A young man was using this app and he was doing margin trades, which he didn't really understand, which basically means you can leverage how much money you are trading with. And he had this big trade, this big set of trades that made him, for the moment, have an outstanding debt of over $700,000. He didn't understand that it would take a few days for all those trades to reconcile and his balance would look more normal. So he saw this, didn't understand it, thought he had made a terrible mistake that would ruin his life. And so the tragedy of the story is that he took his own life based on the design that he interpreted in a specific way. This is terrible, and these are tragic stories. But this helps explain the reason why so many of the things that we use in our lives that are frustrating or annoying or difficult to use, why they are the way that they are. Just like we tend to scramble around, we're just trying to get things done on budget and on time, we're stressed out, we deal with annoying people. Same thing is true in the working world, in the professional world. There's business goals, there's requirements, it's all in the abstract. People forget to think like designers do. Let's think about the end result first. Let's write the press release first. Let's think first about the person who's going to use that. What is that user interface going to look like? This is often forgotten and done way too late. So if you think about your everyday lives, things that you use that are actually really annoying, that have way too many features that you never use, that confuse you. Microwaves are actually really simple devices. Most of the time, you're doing one of two things. 1 minute, 2 minute, 5 minute. That's mostly what you do. Yet there's this array of complicated things, like it's an airplane, a fighter plane cockpit of how many different controls and different options you can set, which you almost never use. And if you ever buy anything from Amazon or Walmart that comes in one of these packages that you need basically a pickaxe to open, why would someone do that? Why would someone design it that way? Which leads to another angle of thinking about design. Design doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to solve a problem that makes people happy. Design is just a problem-solving approach. So there's two different kinds of designs to think about. One is designing for sale, that you're designing something purely for thinking about, you're designing in a way purely to make it as attractive as possible at the moment of purchase. You're not as concerned about how easy to use it is. Is it going to be durable? Is it easy to repair? Is it good for the environment? You don't have to think about those things if all you care about is sales. And depending on the values of a different corporation or a different organization, they may emphasize designing for sale far more than they do design for use. If you think of all the infomercials that you watch, you end up buying the thing and you never use it. Like, that's not an accident. They're intentionally designing it in a way where they're emphasizing one kind of design way over another. There's no guarantee that simply because you're designing something, you're going to do it in a way that's for the benefit of a person or society or the world at large. And this is true anytime that you deal with a frustrating technology. If you do anything where you're working with, like, why could that happen? How could they be so stupid? The reasons why I've explained so far is part of why. That the trade-offs that they had to make, they chose one direction instead of another. And that's why you see so many popular products that have groups of people who are so angry and frustrated by them. It's not an accident. These things were designed that way. They traded off certain kinds of design choices over others. And there are ramifications and costs that come with that may not be directly reflected in the short-term bottom line for how companies sell what they do. Now, my last little note for you is that one irony of all this, one irony about design looking at the world, is that we always pay attention to things that frustrate us and make us angry. But when design is done really well, it's become so natural and so simple and straightforward, we tend not to even notice it at all. So for anyone who uses a mobile device, which is all of us now, and you use this simple pinch and zoom gesture, that didn't just fall from the sky. It took a lot of work by a lot of different inventors, Myron Kruger being one of the most important, who spent so much work and effort figuring out how to make that feel as natural as possible. So simple that a child can pick it up, and that's the gesture they do automatically. That's not done for free. Someone did all that work. And then even in our own daily lives, when you think about a light switch, how many different patents and engineered solutions and design choices are made to get power from the power grid or from the hydro plant or the coal plant, all the way through wires and power grids and transformers, all the way to make it to your house. When you push that little button, all that work is done for you. The water system, same thing. No one thinks about when they put they want to fill up their glass of water for the day, where that water comes from and how many thousands of people had to design different little inventions to clean that water and process that water, bring it all the way from where it actually comes from. You probably don't even know where your water comes from, what the source is. We don't even think about it. It just becomes transparent. And that leads us to believe somehow that design is easy, that it's just so simple and obvious to make things intuitive. But it really requires a tremendous amount of effort and the kinds of thinking I've been talking about so far to make those things happen. So that's my last story for you. And if you like anything I've said and you want to learn more about my work or hear more of these fun stories, one easy way to do that, you go to my website. There's a newsletter. It's totally free. You get access to a lot of the chapters from all these books and access to all the stories and stuff that I write about on a regular basis. But now is the time, as I mentioned earlier on, where I'd love to shift who's in charge now over to you folks. And you can ask me about anything that you want. It could be about design, and you have a specific question about designing things well and what it means for you. Or if you want to ask me about Pittsburgh and what summers are there like, or how to make career choices, I'm happy to go wherever you want to lead me. So thanks for listening. And thanks to all the students who did all the hard work to help make this event run. It's been going smoothly so far. And I want to thank everybody who's still awake and paying attention. And with that, I'm happy to hear what the first question is.
Hey, Scott, thanks for all of that. Just wow, such an impressive presentation. At this time, we will be taking questions from the audience, participants that are here. If you would like to ask your question with your voice, then just raise your hand and I will call on you at some point. I'll also be looking at the chat, so if you want to put questions there. Also, there's a Q&A function in Zoom. If you want to put the questions there, that is fine as well. I do see a first question here already from DJ Jeffries. So DJ, if you would like to share with us, that would be great.
Sure. Hey, Scott, thanks so much for being here. I really enjoyed your presentation. Something that stuck out to me was about starting with the end in mind and about design as a verb. So I've been thinking a lot about designing as like a personal brand, designing a personal brand. When you think about the future, especially in these times of uncertainty, what skills or habits do you think people should be looking towards?
Well, I actually listened to Charmaine's talk, which was just before mine, and I thought she had some great advice in there about, she had a whole riff on feedback, that you have to recognize that is, I mean, that was implied in some of what I talked about, this going back and forth. But a lot of people who are passionate about their ideas are terrible at taking feedback. They take any bit of anything, any response they get that isn't, that's great, that's awesome, that's perfect, they take as a personal insult. And a very important lesson, which is hard to learn, it took me a long time to learn, is separating me as a person from the things I make. And if I write a book, if I write a chapter, do a blog post, or do a talk, and someone says, I watched the talk and this part was good, but this other part needed a lot of work. You know, you talk too fast, you're a New Yorker, you talk with your hands. If I want to learn anything, it's not going to come from people telling me I was great. I'm not going to learn anything from that. I'll feel good about it. Okay, I was great. Not going to get any better. The only way I'm going to get better is by someone telling me something I didn't think about or I didn't notice. And I'm not obligated to do what they say, but I owe it to myself if I want to be a better designer or thinker or writer tomorrow, to shut up and listen, write it down, and then look at it again when I'm not angry about it. And so I read every book review. Some people like, I can't read the reviews, it's terrible, it's toxic. I read every one. I don't like it, but I learn more from the bad ones. And so I don't know if the pandemic and what's going on now changes that. I think everything is so uncertain now that you need more feedback, that you need to rely on more guideposts to figure out what good means currently. So that'd be my advice. But I think what Charmaine said, if you didn't catch that session, I don't know how far into the session, it's probably maybe halfway through, but she had a riff on feedback I thought was great.
Great. Thank you so much. And I have to say, you're very brave to read every review.
Great. Thank you, DJ, for that question. Just FYI, DJ is an alumnus of our program, so we're happy to have him back here today. I do see a hand raised in the chat, so I'm going to go to that. Sonny Simpson, I'm going to allow you to talk at this time.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, somehow my picture's not showing. Hey, Scott, I wanted to tell you, first of all, I'm a professor and I use your Myths of Innovation book often with my students. So thank you for that, because we still are busting all the myths.
Thank you.
Yeah. But what I wanted to ask you is, for in this time period in particular, many of us across the nation or across the globe are having to pivot and to come up with multiple revenue streams. And do you have some specific ways you can talk about how to use your design thinking and ideating where people can go with those multiple revenue streams?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think design thinking, that's all a process. So it applies to anything, any problem you're trying to solve. Applying that approach of experimentation, of planning to do loops, do a small thing and test it. And again, I'm going to reference Charmaine again. She had advice about launch. Someone asked her about launching new courses, and she said, "Well, you're going to launch something small. You're going to give a 15-minute version. That kind of approach applies to anything." So I'm in the same place that you're talking about. As I suggested, a major revenue stream for me had been speaking fees from events. Mm-hmm. It's still part of my revenue, but the number of events out there and their budgets has totally changed, and no one really knows what the landscape is going to be next year or late next year. No idea. So I am personally in this situation. Mm-hmm. And so I have to I'm doing it right now, where I'm experimenting with doing courses, but it's the same process. Do something small and something simple, put it out there, get feedback on it from if you can get it from a closed group of people you will get good feedback from, or people who have been fans of yours before, who are not sensitive to being on the beta list where they're getting something that's not quite done, and use that as a loop. And then you'll if you do that experiment and you do it again, you're like, this isn't going well. Okay, you didn't lose that much. Now you've learned a bit. That's not going to go anywhere. I got to try something else. And that there's no escaping that. I think even without a pandemic, even without a tough political year for everybody, that would be the same toolkit. It's just the landscape is a little bit different, and the number of reliable resources now has changed. So right. I don't know that I can give you anything more specific than that, of recognizing you have to think in loops and be willing to experiment and being open to that kind of feedback.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sonny, for that question. I have a question here in the chat that comes from Drew Arnon Hills, or Hillis. Would it be fair to compare the back cover of a book to a mission statement for a company or event?
Yeah, it's close. I think the difference is that a mission statement is something that customers would never see. They'd probably never see it. So I might have a mission statement. I want to open the best, juice smoothie restaurant in the country, and that would be my mission statement. But that doesn't serve as a sample of me making a small cup of juice for someone. And what you want to approximate is actually making the thing rather than an abstraction of the thing. An abstraction of the thing is easy to feel great about. I want to be the best author in the history of the universe. Okay, yes, I feel great about that. But that doesn't mean I can write a paragraph that someone will read where they want to read the next one. So that would be the only risk there. Is a mission is an abstraction, a vision statement is an abstraction. You want to be focusing on an actual tangible thing that someone in the world would have to consume that's in line with what you're actually going to make.
Great, thank you. I have another question here from Michael Fasali. How are you able to stay motivated through all of your struggles early on or even later in your profession? I think like even right now in COVID, how are you staying motivated?
What makes you think that I am? I'm serious. This is a rough year for everybody. I feel like there's a lot of upsides to being independently employed. I mean, I'm a full-time author. This is what I've been doing for 17 years. A lot of upsides to it. One downside is it's less stable. I don't show up to a team of people every day. We're working on the same thing together. So I have to rely more on my extended network of other independent people, which isn't as strong as it would be if I had my same team of people I work with every day for 5 years. And we work for an organization that has resources and support to keep us going. So I think I try to focus on the day. That's my habit and my ritual. I'm not great at doing things 3 times a week. I kind of suck at that. But if I want to do something and I do it every day, I'm pretty good at that. So usually I have a habit. I write at least in my journal every day. If I'm working on a new book or a new talk, I work on it every day. And that gives me a rhythm. It doesn't mean I have to do it for 5 hours a day, but I show up every day. And that's usually my way to stay motivated is I have a rhythm, a commitment. I'm not thinking about, do I write today or not? Do I design it? No, it's automatic and it's built in. And that's usually that's what usually works for me. Everybody's habits are different though. And the best toolkit you have for motivation, psychological health, all those things is self-awareness. Yeah.
So there's another question here from Marbell Phelps, and she's wondering if that first book that you didn't get published, what lessons were learned in that? Are you content with it not getting published?
So the book was about the design of the London subway system. I'm a kind of a transportation nerd, and that was just I don't know. It's a good project, but publishing world, the formalized publishing world depends a lot on your credentials. If you're going to write a book about the subway system, you need to probably be an architect, an urban planner. These have degrees in those things. I have none of those things. So I pitch publishers and their first response is legitimately, they're like, well, we want to sell the book, but part of how we sell the book is you. If we can sell the book that this is one of the leading transportation experts from wherever, that helps, but you're not that person. So that was why that book didn't go anywhere. I learned a lot about the publishing world from that. The first book I did publish was about, guess what? Managing project teams for software projects. Why could I find a publisher for that? That had been my job for 10 years. So that seems unfair in a way, but you think about the business of publishing. They want to sell books. People buy books based on the expertise of the person who sold it. But I have self-published now 4 of the 8 books I've published. It's not an accident. That makes me an entrepreneur. I have all the decisions. I have all the costs. But I'm no longer reliant on a gatekeeper to decide what I can do or not. And self-publishing, if anyone is listening and thinking about it, it is technically easy. It's not the hard part. Publishing a book, if you write a PDF, you can go to if you Word document, save to PDF. You can go to Amazon, upload it to Kindle, and within a few hours, it will be up on Amazon with its own page. All that stuff's built in. That's not the hard part. The hard part is you designing the book. Who is it for? How are you going to market it? All those pieces. The idea part is not the hard part. So I definitely learned from that failure, but you always learn from failure because you had assumptions that turned out not to be true. And then Kierkegaard again, make the failure. Now you can learn from it.
Great. Thank you for that. I really wish that Zoom would have one design feature, which is where I can just drag some chat and put it on the screen and everybody can read what the questions are. Later at 2 p.m., we have a session with a YouTuber, and we're using a platform called StreamYard that allows you to do that. So maybe it's user error on my part. And
no, we can blame Zoom. Let's blame Zoom.
It's definitely Zoom.
Yeah.
But I do have a question from Riley Vaughn here, and it's just a great question. I thought it would be great to throw on the screen. When making these large occupational changes in your life, did you ever have a mentor or someone you looked for guidance? So the importance of mentorship. Hearing you speak now is definitely inspiring, and I appreciate you taking your time to give this talk. So I wanted to share all of that.
Oh, thanks. That's good to hear. I don't think I have been good at finding mentors. Not a strength for me. I think I definitely have had them, but that had more to do with accident, I think. I did not have a mentor for writing books. I was just arrogant enough to think I didn't need one. So but that's not what I would recommend. I think it's a personal failing that I'm too arrogant or too egotistical or too maybe insecure to go ask someone, will you mentor me? I just I don't look at that as a strength necessarily. I'm a highly independent person, obviously. That is a strength, but the downside of that is I don't seek out guidance enough. So I did not have a writer. I did not have a mentor for writing. I'm a reader, so I had found reading books is my way to approximate that, but it's not quite as good. You can't get specific feedback on what you are doing from a book.
So the next question actually is kind of a very thoughtful question. I think it does come from Madison Engel, and she's saying, how can you make our future job career choices more intrinsically motivated, rather than being based on economic reasons, money? So I kind of think that this is a question about how do you design your life? How do you design?
Yeah. I think that you can't. I mean, I think it's a really. I don't want to call it flawed. That's too strong of a negative word. I think it's curious how the educational system is designed, that you're expected at 19 to know what you want to do for the majority of your professional life. I think that's it's almost a ridiculous amount of prediction you're supposed to have of who you're going to be. And it's kind of limiting in a way. So I don't know that you can really sort out what's going to be intrinsically motivating without trying different things. It's experimentation again. That if you think you want to be a writer, well, you should probably try writing write a short book or write a chapter of a book. If you find it difficult to show up every day to do that, you probably really don't want to write a book. You probably think you do because it sounds like a romantic, yes, I want to, but you really don't want to do it. And so you have to experiment. And when you're young, it's easier to do that. Usually you have less commitments. You're not taking care of as many people. So the earlier you can take those experiments, the better. And usually in university, in school and college, if you can, there's opportunities to take advantage of to experiment. Like an internship is a bigger experiment. That's a whole summer or something. But it's a kind of experimentation to try it out. I don't know, even now at my age, I'm 48 years old. I don't think I'm done at having new things to try and do. So I have to keep experimenting. It's like dating. Like you have to go on 10 dates to find like 3 people you like, 2 who like you, and 1 that maybe, like there's a ratio of things to try and the likelihood of finding the positive result. It's going to be what, 30%, 40%? I don't know. So that means you have to do it. You have to try different life experiences and work experiences to get for the intrinsically rewarding things.
So I think people really want you to have a mentor. I'm getting a lot of questions related to mentoring here. I think you touched a little bit on this in your talk, but when it comes to people doubting you or haters, sort of how do you deal with that? And they kind of recommend maybe a mentor might help, but what are your strategies?
Hey, if anyone who's listening wants to mentor me and you think you can help me, send me an email. Like I'm open for it. Just because I'm older than you and written more books than you maybe doesn't mean that you can't mentor me. The haters, I think it's just par for the course that if you're doing creative work, that means that it is subjective how people are going to evaluate how good your thing is. So Some like a fun story that I'd like to share. A Great Gatsby. I think it's a great book. Fitzgerald, one of the most famous American novels. Go to the Amazon page for that book. There's something like 400 one-star reviews for that book. There's 400 one-star reviews, like 1 star, like not 3 stars. It was okay. Not 2 stars. I didn't, 1 star. So that tells you something about human nature, that people respond in their commentary on things with a lot of stuff that's really about themselves. And when you put stuff out in the world, you're going to get some of that. And as I mentioned earlier, though, some of it is just empty hate and just, it's not even about you. They had a bad day or they didn't even read the book. A lot of reviews I see are like that. They'll give it a 3-star review and say, it was okay. It didn't really do anything for me. That's all it says. That's the worst review for me in the world. Because if they could write more about what they didn't like or what didn't, then I learned something from it. That's the worst review for me. Well, I don't learn anything. If I get a 1-star review and someone writes thoughtfully about what was missing or what I got wrong or other books that did a better job than mine, like that's a huge win. That's like, okay, I can learn something from this review. That's how I approach it. What can I learn from this? And sometimes when it happens in person, I have to ask questions to get them past telling me it's bad, to get to, okay, what should I have done differently? And that takes a lot of thick skin to do. But if you want to learn, you got to find the useful feedback where you can get it. And it's not going to be, most likely, it's not going to be from your friends and supporters. They're going to tell you it's great. And that's good to have them around. But the criticism is going to come from other places.
Great. So this one may or may not be the last question. Depends on how long it takes you to respond, because I think it's going to get a story going. And just a quick little promo for the Department of Communication Studies. We offer a variety of courses where you can improve your public speaking, your storytelling, and so forth. And this question deals with this. So the question is, when you first started out, did you enjoy public speaking? If not, what steps did you take to enjoy it? And I'm going to throw on there, because one thing we do in our business and professional communication course is watch videos from The Tonight Show, worst I ever bombed. So what's your worst bomb story?
Well, the first part of the question is an easier one to answer. I hated public speaking, hated it. I had to do it as a team leader at Microsoft. I had to do it. I was just angry. I was an angry speaker. Like I was yelling at people. I spoke so fast. I'm a New Yorker. And I watched a tape of it and I was really embarrassed, not really even for myself, but I was representing my team. So whether I liked speaking or not, my job was, I was a manager. I had to represent my team's work. And that was my motivation to get better at it. And then as I got better at it, I got more comfortable with it. I felt less intimidated by audiences. And I found it to be another kind of creative challenge. It's a design challenge. It's a writing challenge. A lot of good speaking is really just about writing. The quote in the Confession of Public Speakers, the book I wrote about this, says, good public speaking is based on good private thinking. It's the material that matters so much. And I really enjoyed thinking about what I was going to present. And then little by little, I did it more and I found it enjoyable and I got to pick more about what I was going to speak. And then when I quit to become a writer, I knew speaking was going to be a big part of that. And I was far more comfortable with it. I found it the opposite challenge to writing. Writing, I get to control every word and every period. It's all on me. I get to revive. Speaking is a performance. And as much as I've crafted it and worked on it, it's live. And there's a different experience as a creative person doing something in real time as opposed to writing. So I like them both.
Okay, great. Are you going to skip the bomb story?
Oh, I don't have so I've collected these. So if you do a search on scottberkun.com for worst speaking stories, you'll find it's not just my list. I got a list from other professional speakers and experts of like 50 stories. And each one is more ridiculous and and relieving than the next, because a lot of these things will never, ever happen to you, but they happen to other people. And that makes you feel a little bit better about whatever you're afraid about.
That's great. All right. So this will be the last question. And it comes from a student that was just looking for what advice you might have for people starting out on their career.
I think it's some of what I've said already. If you're starting out, you should not expect to hit it all, to get it perfect on the first try. I didn't. I was lost in Pittsburgh. It took me a long time. And you have to be willing to experiment. You have to be willing to try. What you're trying to do is anything creative at all, any kind of creativeness to it, then don't wait to get a job before you create. If you want to be, you want to be work in public relations, if you want to be a public speaker, those are all things you can build and craft and put out into the world yourself. You can invent clients in your head and do a public relations campaign for them. If you want to be a public speaker, we have YouTube, we have TikTok, there's formats, and you should get in the habit of producing it yourself while you're interviewing. Don't wait for someone else to give you a platform. Go and create and do it yourself, and try to cultivate people who give you useful feedback. And you'll get better while you're looking for a job. So that every interview, between interviews, you're getting better. You're getting more confidence. You're getting more experience. That's the best advice I can give to anyone looking for a job at any time. Don't wait to get more experience. You can find it on your own.
Great. Learn by doing. And at this time, SIUC Sandy Pincinel-Conway will say a final word.
Thank you so much. I am Sandy Pincinel-Conway, the Chair of Communication Studies and the Interim Director of the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies Program. And Scott, on behalf of all the attendees and the sponsors of this session, who include SIU's Department of Communication Studies, the SIU College of Liberal Arts, and Communication at Work, LLC, I want to say a huge thank you for this engaging, dynamic, and passionate presentation. Thanks for taking the time to prepare your remarks for us and to give us such good advice to the questions that we asked, and even questions that maybe we didn't know we had, but we certainly got answered today. And our students especially appreciate it. There are three things that really stood out to me. One is the two terms, imagination and visualization. And you said to imagine your conclusion. And to me, that seems like such, maybe it's not innovative, but in my mind, it is innovative, because I am stuck in that kind of what's the next thing I have to do now today, not what is the thing I'm visualizing and how do I get there. But then the way you get there, as you explained, is thinking in drafts. And I love how you showed that this is what you've done on a small scale and also a larger scale in your whole life with your what now moment. So I did this thing, how do I revise my skills? How do I take what I've learned, revise it to do the next thing that I'm gonna do in my life, my what now moment. And then I just came from a session this morning and also yesterday afternoon on creating accessible materials, specifically in courses, but your talk here on design helps me to think about how do I create accessible materials in many facets of life. And so, for example, the session this morning was about creating documents, web pages, PowerPoints that are accessible for those with vision impairments. And it feels like this is all coming together in this moment, because that's a responsibility to do that. And we can do that maybe much more efficiently and better if we think in drafts, and if we get feedback, and if we imagine the conclusion that we want to have with those. So I am definitely going to use what you presented here to plan my classes, which is kind of the thing that I have going on right now, thinking about my spring semester courses and whatnot. So I really enjoyed being here. It was well worth the time. I could listen to you talk for hours, Scott. You definitely have that going for you, I think. So please accept my virtual handshake here. That's the best we can do right now.
Wait, it's elbows. Isn't it
yeah,
elbows? Aren't we doing elbows? Okay.
Right, a little elbow or a fist bump or something. And also there'll be a thank you card and gift coming in the mail for you. Really well done. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. I hope everyone who's listening has a great rest of the event. And it's Halloween weekend, so have that to look forward to. Trick or treat.